Hey everybody, this is Scotty March. Today we're going to be talking about replication. So I was talking to one of my partners and they asked me a fairly simple question. So how do you replicate your backup jobs from one site to another? So I figured I'd actually show it. It's really straightforward. The setup on this will take you about 10 minutes to do that. What we have right now, I have two separate clusters. So the first cluster is what you're staring at. This is a 3-node cluster. It's all sitting on our vSphere. Right. My second cluster is a single node. That's going to be the target that we're actually going to. So what we're going to do first is we're going to set up the replication on the 3-node cluster so that it points to the single node. So this is C cluster 01, this is C cluster 02. To start, we're going to click on infrastructure in the top left. We're going to go to remote clusters, and then we're going to choose add cluster. We're going to put in the IP address for the VIP for the second cluster here. And notice that it was accepted. We're going to put in a username. Now this is important. Do not use the admin user account if you can avoid it. The reason being, the admin password or user account password is usually tied to multi-factor authentication. That will actually break replication. So what we want to do is create a service account for this. In this case, I created one called Replicate. Give it a password and you're good to go. So interface settings, right now we have it set for auto select because it's a virtual cluster. There's only 2 NICs on this cluster. Typically, if this is a physical cluster, you're going to have more than that. So you can choose what NIC pairing you want to use. Again, in this case, we're going to leave it on auto select and we're going to click on connect. That's going to go ahead and validate. So this cluster was validated. Now we can go to cluster options and choose remote access and replication, which gives us more options here. So the next step is actually setting up our storage domain pairing. You can have multiple storage domains. In this case, we don't. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to choose our storage pairing. We're going to, in this, again, it's default storage domain on both. And then we can go ahead and take a look at some of the other settings below. So replication settings, the first one is all cluster node IPs are reachable. This is if you have multiple nodes in your cluster. You can actually spread out that replication workload across those various different nodes. In this case, we're definitely going to choose that. So I'm going to turn this on. We're going to leverage outbound compression. We're not going to leverage encryption, but we can if we decide to do so. This is where you would put the encryption key. You can generate one. Data transfer rate limits, if you want to actually restrict the transfer rate between your 2 different clusters. That'll help with WAN traffic if you are limited in WAN traffic. And then you can choose the times in which you want to replicate and which you don't want to replicate by choosing quiet times and data transfer rate limit overrides. Once that's set, you hit create. And that will set up the replication between, in this case, C cluster 01 to C cluster 02. Now you have to do the same exact thing on the second cluster that you're replicating to, or your target. It's a very similar process. We're going to go to infrastructure, remote clusters. Notice this looks different. This is actually 6.8. The first cluster is 6.6 U4. So navigationally, they are a little bit different. But once you start clicking on this, you're going to notice that it's asking for the same information. So we're going to choose one of the IPs for the VIP of the 3 nodes. Again, we're going to use replicate as our service account. Put in the password. We're going to choose automatically for our interface group and click continue. We're going to enable remote access, configure our storage pairing for our storage domains. We're going to leave outbound compression on. We're going to distribute the workload for the multiple NICs. We're going to leave encryption, throttling, and quiet time off. And we're going to choose continue and then register. So one interesting thing to note, now that CCluster02 is configured, if we go back to CCluster01, what you're going to see is that when you click on this, now you're going to have the option for CCluster02. So this is giving you the ability to manage both clusters in one place. So if you go to the dashboard, you'll notice that this is the dashboard for CCluster02. We choose CCluster01, that's the dashboard for CCluster01. So we, in effect, actually connected these two clusters together, not just from a replication perspective, but actually from a configuration and management perspective as well. Well, thanks for listening, and hopefully this was useful.